Hello, welcome to another render demo video tutorial. I'm Mark Hokovec and I'm going to be taking you through Adobe Illustrator Advanced. If you have not used Illustrator before, you probably want to get my Adobe Illustrator Basic, which takes you through the Illustrator's interface, such as tools, your window panels, and everything you need to know to get to this point. And from there, I'll be taking you through how to render this training shoe using only Illustrator. Let's go ahead and open chapter 1 so you can follow along with me as we go through this tutorial. So this is the way I left it, some bold colors just to kind of get a feel for the different pieces and parts of the shoe. So let's work with this shoe facing in the left direction, and we're probably going to have our light source kind of coming in from this angle here. So as you're creating this, just keep that in mind so you can kind of pick up on highlights from this top left direction. So the first thing I'm going to do is down here, I'm going to start with this tooling, this red area here, the foam part, and I want to kind of make sure that things are correct and looking as real as possible. So right here, these corners are a little pointed, and in reality they probably have a little bit of a curve to it. So there is a function that you can round corners, and notice you can control how much you want to do that. So let's see, let's put in 2 and preview that. So that looks pretty good. So we're going to go and do 2, and we'll hit OK. And let's just go ahead and do that for all of these pieces here. I'm just going to select them all at the same time. Just execute this at one time. And since I've already done it, I can just hit apply round corners, and it will use the same same information from the last one. Okay. Now one other thing that I'm going to do here is I'm just going to select all of these pieces, and we're going to put this on a separate layer so we can work a little bit faster. I create a new layer, and I'm just going to move these up into this other layer. We're going to lock the rest of the shoe. So now we can kind of just work on this layer exclusively. Alright, so let's start adding some details here. So I'm just going to stick with this red color. You could use reference images to pull colors from, or just go up to your color palette and kind of change from one color to another. But we're just going to leave this red because this is a training shoe, and this kind of has a nice pop. The upper will be very simplified and toned down, and we really want to pop this base, the tooling portion of the shoe. So I'm going to grab these shapes here, and these are going to be kind of like sculpted areas that sculpt inward. And I'm going to turn off this line weight here, this stroke, and let's go ahead and give these a gradient fill, and let's multiply these under transparency. So there's different ways you can do this. Probably want to select just a couple at a time. Kind of play with the angle of the gradient. There we go. Now notice these shapes are on top of our windows that go all the way through, so we want to, let's just lock these for now. And then we'll go ahead and grab all of these and bring these to the front. And we're also going to turn the line weight on these down as well. by doing that, it just makes this look a lot more realistic. If you have really thick line weight, it just looks somewhat, you know, fake and cartoony. So you can keep it on and maybe just turn your stroke down to like 0.25, so it's very, very thin where you can barely even recognize that it's there. Alright, so now we have some shapes that are kind of looking like there's some sculpting going on, but let's try to get some more realism here. So what I'm going to do with this shape here, I'm going to copy and paste in front a new shape, as you can see right there, and I'm going to add a gradient to this as well, and I'm going to do the gradient in the opposite direction because I want the top leading edge, because my light source coming from the top right, I want that top leading edge to be brighter. And here you can really start to control your gradient this way here. And another thing you can do is if you offset this shape, if you offset this a little, let's see. You can really start to get a little bit more definition happening. So now what you want to be concerned about also is when you do multiply layers, because I'm multiplying one on top of the other, it's actually multiplying over top of another multiply, so you're getting like a double effect happening. So if you want to get rid of that, one thing you need to do is just grab your layers, and we're going to duplicate this so we can kind of see what's happening down here. Let me grab all of this here. Let's just duplicate this for the time being so we can kind of see what's happening. So here's my base object, and I have my gradient over top, but I want to kind of cut these forms out of it. So what I can do is, if I group these, let's just move those over here as another copy. I'm going to take these and I'm going to create a compound path. And what that has done is, let's see, I'll move it down here so you can kind of see what's happened. It's created just the outline shape. So anything that happens in here, it's not going to be multiplied over top of a multiply. So then when I put these shapes back in place, you'll notice here I get a little bit more of a highlight that's picking up in this area. And if I want to change this gradient to be a little bit more realistic now, because this is kind of coming in, I do want to have maybe some more of like a chiseled effect. Let's see. So say we want to create more of a harder angle here. Let's try this. It's a little too thick right now. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to create some lines. These are going to be kind of like some chiseled areas, and I'm going right through this. I'm just going to create a couple more so I can do this all at the same time. And note over here, like, you really want to make sure that your perspective is on and looking accurate. something kind of like this. And if you want to adjust, by all means go and kind of tweak these lines so they look good. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I want to make additional shapes. I'm going to make a few additional shapes where we're going to add some additional gradients. So let's just copy all of these shapes. I would do this without copying, but I want to really make you see what's happening here so you can understand what we're doing. So I'm going to take these shapes here and I'm going to divide these all out, and I'm just going to apply, I'm going to ungroup these. Now what I'm going to do is these are all, and I unlock them all, so now these are all individual shapes. So let's start out, let's bring this guy and use this point here to kind of snap into position here. So by placing that back in, and here I can delete these lines. Here you can start to see how this gradient, I can kind of customize the shapes a little and change the gradient angle. So we get a little bit of a darker effect. And for this shape here, so let me just go ahead and I'll just fill in these other ones just so we're not bouncing back and forth. Alright, so now for these other angles here, we want to get a little bit more of a highlight happening. So how do we do that? So I'm just going to leave this artwork here. And again, I'm just going to copy these shapes. And what I want to do is I'm going to create these all together. So let's just make another layer here. Let me just fill that so you can see what we're doing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a highlight. And let's do this. I'm just going to make a background for now, and I'm going to fill it with a color so you can see what's happening. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take my ellipse tool, and I'm going to create an elliptical shape, and I'm going to fill this with white with no stroke. And then I'm going to copy and paste in front and just scale this up. And this will have a white fill, but my transparency will go down to 0. Now, I'm going to blend these two shapes together. So selecting the points. So let's also do this. Let's move this to the back before we do the blend. And you notice there's a transition of 1, so let's increase that to, let's just say 25. Now the higher your number here, the more data that it's going to absorb, and your document's going to get a little heavy. So just be wary of how much points. The more you have, the smoother the gradient looks, but it's going to increase your file size. Okay, so what are we going to do with this now? Well, what we're going to do is we are going to copy this for now, and we're going to take the shape here, and what I want to do is I want to create a highlight specific to this shape, and this shape, so 3 different shapes. So we're going to do these 3 different times. And again, you can customize this. You can move your highlight to a specific area so you get a little bit more of a hot spot. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a mask. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to create a clipping mask. So you want to make sure that before I do that, let's copy this. We'll make that one here, and we'll copy this, duplicate it, and we'll make another one here. Okay, so let's take these 2 shapes here, make a clipping mask. Let's take these 2 shapes, make a clipping mask, and let's take these 2 shapes and make a clipping mask. So now we have 3 masked objects, and because they're in the same locations, I can click on a point that shares the point here, and it will snap in place. And we've just created a highlight. Now you can kind of see that this is a little powerful, so you just have to go into your transparency and play with how much of that you want to kind of show through. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove those shapes, and I'm going to take this new art here, and we're going to move that up into position here. And I'm just going to delete some of those forms. Okay, so now you can kind of see you're getting really some good depth in here. Now you might go back and say, hey, this is a little dark up here. So maybe we kind of change this from being pure black to maybe like 80% or so. And then if you lock that, you can kind of take these shapes here, and since those are fairly dark as well, just change that down. And just play with the opacity and the darkness of all these shapes, because they are working twice as hard. Let's just get rid of that shape. Let's move it down here just so we have it, but I think we don't really need that right now. And you should experiment, go ahead and play with just moving things around till you get it exactly where you want. That looks a little bit better. And you notice if you're a little bit darker, you can start to see the different faceted edges, so you just have to decide which ones you want to be more dominant, and you start to look a little bit more realistic. Okay, so that's our shape here. Now, one additional thing we're going to do is this brush that we create, or this shape here, this gradient that we created, we're going to use this to create a highlight brush. So let's do that right now. And notice our shape here. We want to create this brush where our highlight is from this position all the way here. It's a little bit off to the right. So if your center of this line is here, you want to get that highlight a little bit to the right. So let's take this, we're going to shrink it a little bit. And we're going to move with this selection tool, we're going to move this over like this. And we're just going to make it a little bit thinner. And what we're going to do is, under our brushes, we're going to make this a brush. So we're going to select this and drag it over into our brushes palette and make it an art brush, and select OK. And notice it's because it's white, you're not seeing it in here. Don't worry, it's there. It's right here. So what do we do with this? Well, let's go back up here, and we want to apply to the stroke. So we have this shape here. So let's go ahead and duplicate this. And again, I'm doing this so you can see what's happening. I'm going to hit D so we just get the line weight. I'm going to release this from the clipping mask. I'm just going to select this perimeter shape here. I'm going to cut it here, and let's say here. Now don't discard this bottom part because we want to use that in a second. So right here, let's bring this, before we do anything, let's bring this back up and snap it like so. And now let's take the fill off, and now the stroke, we're going to click here, and right now it's on multiply, so put it on normal. Alright, 100%. So look what's happened. We just created a highlight with a vector illustrator brush. Now this is very concentrated and very powerful. If you change the stroke weight 2.5, notice how it shrinks. You probably want to turn down the transparency just a little bit because it is pretty bright. So if you zoom out, you can kind of see that there is a little bit of a step here that happens, and you catch this highlight. Now you can also get the bottom here. So we left this bottom line, and you can notice that there is because it's multiplied, there is a fill. So let's just take that off so you can see. Okay. So this was our white highlight. So let's do this. Let's just duplicate this. I'm holding Shift and Option, by the way, and dragging that down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my outline view, and I'm just going to select, by holding Shift, both of those positions, and notice that they're both white. So let's go out of preview mode. So now with those selected, I'm going to change these to black. And it kept the same transparency of 0, but it changed the fills to black. So now I have a black gradient here. So with my black selection tool, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drag this over into my brushes palette, create another art brush, and when you click OK, you're actually going to see this one show up because it is black. So this palette, this should be somewhat lighter gray so you can see that white in there, but it is there. Alright, so let's go back up here. Let's move this out of the way. And I am going to select the stroke and click on my new brush that I created, and there you go. Now this is erring on this side of the line. I want it to err on this side of the line because this is the darker shadow point. So if you click on P for a pen, and you can change the direction. So click on P and click on this end point, and it'll change the direction. You can also, if you cut, this will create separate shapes here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this up in here. Now, let's zoom in so you can see. So right now, it doesn't look that great. What I usually do with my black brushes is I make them a multiplied effect. And I do definitely turn this down to at least 50%. Because I don't want that shadow to be too overpowering. But you can really see how this starts to give it some three-dimensionality to it. So again, I'll do the same for this shape. Now maybe for this shape, we want this to be a little bit darker, because it is in a darker area. And let's turn this stroke down to like 0.75. And then over here, let's trim this out. Let's turn this down to 0.75, multiply, and we'll do this maybe like 70%. Okay, so there is our shape rendered. And this area here, you probably want to catch a little bit of a highlight here as well, because this edge is going to get some of that light. So what we can do is, on this shape here, which is our shapes here, let's duplicate this. And I like to have extra shapes lying around so that I can just use those. I don't have to use this original or try to find it. So I usually make a lot of extra duplicate shapes. So here I'm just going to hit this. I'm going to remove the fill, and I'm going to add that white highlight to it. Now it's best to do this over a gray background so you can see what's happening. So here I'm going to catch this edge with that highlight. And since we have everything selected, let's switch this down to like 50. Or maybe to 0.25 before I cut. So now I'm going to cut. I'm going to cut that out. I'm going to cut here and here, and I'm going to cut here and maybe somewhere around here. And these right now are all grouped, so let's ungroup those. Grab all three of these at the same time. Let's start to drag this up and align that as so. So you can see how we caught that edge. And again, right now it's a little bright. And you could even make this smaller, 0.1. Let's just change that just a tad down. Okay, so there you go. Right now we have our front leading edge of the EVA rendered out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and complete the rear sections. This rear section's in the same way, and then we'll continue on after that. So I'll see you in a second. Here I've opened chapter 2, and notice I've completed the back section of the midsole. So I applied similar rendering style that I just explained in chapter 1. I just finished that rear section off. And before we move to the next stage, I would like to add some texture to this midsole. So right now, let's take a look at what we have. So I'm grabbing the lowest level shape. I'm just going to zoom in on that. And want to add a texture to this. So how do we do that? Well, there's one way. Let's take off the stroke. Let's go up to Effect, and under Texture, go to Texturizer. And let's just zoom in on this. So what you can do here on the top right is change this to the presets, and you can play with your scaling to get this to look like a midsole texture. But what I'd like to do is load a texture, and in here we're going to go to this project here under textures, and we're going to grab one of these presets that I already have in here. So you could kind of take a look at a few of these to figure out which midsole texture you want to apply, and if you want, you can create your own texture as well. Just save it off as a PSD, 144 by 144 pixels, and you can load those at any time. And let's go with, let's see, maybe this number 9, something somewhat soft. So let's load that in. So here you can see it's really light. If you increase the relief, you start to see darker shading that starts to happen. And if you increase the scaling, shape gets larger or smaller, depending on what you're looking for. So let's go with this right here, and we'll hit OK. And you can see what just happened. Just added that texture in here. So let's move this back into position and take a look what happened. So here you can kind of see what's actually happened. Now notice the edges are very pixelated, and that's not really what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offset this by 0.5 millimeters. Negative, so it goes inside, and hit OK. Just delete the previous, put this right back on top. And that will kind of hide and conceal the pixelation that's happening. So if you're comfortable with this, you can just leave it as it is. Maybe turn down the multiply and opacity just to give it a little bit of texture. And we can do the same to the forefoot. Just copy that down here just so we can see what's happening. Let's offset this first, the same offset amount. Just delete the outer position, remove the fill, the stroke, and then apply the same effect. And here, apply texturizer will add the same exact effect. Now, if you don't like the way the multiply is, what that's doing, if you want to change multiply to, you can start playing around with different effects. Some actually work better than others. You can kind of see if you just run through these, many of them aren't really giving us the desired effect. So we'll probably just stick with multiply. Alright. Okay, so let's move on from here. We'll go to the next step, and let's work on our rubber bottom. So with the rubber bottom, we have these lug shapes, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the layer above. I'm going to lock that midsole and select all of these lugs. And then I'm going to deselect this part of that midsole. So it's just the lugs that are selected. And what we're going to do is just create, again, another layer. And we're going to lock the main layer. So now our rubber tread is on a separate layer. Now, these shapes are all the same. They're just repeated. So what we can do, if we just go down here, let's render this shape, and let's start with a shape that like this. So let's render this. So let's do a white bottom rubber tread, or white or slightly gray. So let's fill it with a little bit of gray, and we will remove the stroke either from here or up in the color palette. You can remove it with this here. And let's, because this is conical in shape, we want to have a gradient kind of on both sides of this. So let's copy and paste in front. So Command C, Command F, and then go to our gradient, and with our fill selected we will click here, which will apply that gradient. Let's move the white to the center, click over here to add another color and change that color to black. So now we get kind of like this highlight, and you can reposition this. And depending on how much of that highlight you want to show, you can kind of customize that. Maybe you want the highlight to be further to one side than the other, and less of a shadow. On this left side, color is coming in. So, all right, we like this. Now, what we can do is just grab these. So this is actually a new layer that's on top. So let's multiply that. So in case we change the color, it could be a different color. And let's grab both of these. So let's just make sure everything's unlocked. Okay, so let's grab both of those objects. And let's do this first. Let's just start with these ones here. And I'm just going to move this down so you can see what we have here. So this shape is comprised of these two shapes here. So if we select all of these lugs and we click our eyedropper tool, it will give this gray effect. While these are all selected, Command C, Command F will apply over top, and we will apply this gradient fill on top, and it will give the same exact fill. Now, what's happening is each one of these are shapes, which is increasing the memory of this document. So we can do it this way. There's two ways. Continue in this fashion, or we take this and we go over here to symbol, drag that over to symbol, and create a graphic. And make sure that this is in position in the center for registration. And you can name this whatever you want. Lug shape number 1. So if you have multiple lug shapes, you can reference this one. Just hit OK. So what happened was, this is now a symbol. So we can apply this symbol into each one of these positions and change the angle, which will highly reduce the amount of data and make your file that much smaller. So because we have so many lugs, it's probably better to do that so you're not taking up a lot of memory and space. But because my shapes are already in this position and I don't want to reposition every single one because I've already done that, I'm going to bypass that. I'm going to do it the other way. That increases the data, but just to create things a little with more simplicity here. So I'm going to go ahead, and because the rubber is all on one layer, I'm going to go ahead and select everything, and then I'm going to deselect the ones that I've already completed, and we'll deselect these. So now with my eyedropper, since I have everything selected, I'm going to click on the base color, and then I'm going to copy and paste on top, and I'm going to click on the gradient. So now it's filled all of the shapes. Now you can see what happened here. Why did this happen? Well, our lugs need to go behind that base thickness. So you can see it did that pretty much everywhere. So we're just going to select each one of these lugs and just move it to the back. The nice thing about symbols is if you create a symbol and you decide to modify the symbol, it will modify every one of the lugs that you've created. So whatever changes you make, it'll make that to every single one of those shapes. So if you're looking for ways to save time, that would be a great way to set up your document. Okay, so now we have all of our lugs in position, and one thing up here, our gradients have been applied vertically and not perpendicular to the direction that they're pointing. So we want to go back and just change the gradient angle for each one of these. So we'll just select these individually and do the same for all of them. That way your gradient will just look a little bit more realistic. It's a little tedious, but it's worth it in the end, because it'll just make it look more lifelike. Okay. So now we have all of our lugs colored in, and now another way to make these look real is we want to apply a little bit of a shadow here, because in reality there'd be a little bit of shadow showing through. So let's select, I'm just going to select the top layer, which is the gradient for all of these, and I'm going to just move this down so you can see what's happening. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to divide, and then I'm going to ungroup, and I'm just going to hold shift down and just deselect all of the tips, and then delete. I'll get rid of everything else. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a curved shape. And now this is where your perspective skills come in play. So understanding that this is a conical form, you know, how is that shadow gonna work on this type of shape? What I'm doing is I'm just using the same shape and just moving it, repositioning, scaling, but for the most part it's going to be the same shape. And what we're doing here is we're setting up so that we can divide this out and use the top section as a shadow. So I'm going to select all of these, we're going to divide, and that breaks them apart. I'm going to ungroup, and again I'm going to deselect the parts I want to keep, and then delete will remove everything else. So here, how do we apply this shadow? Well, let's do this. Let's just fill this with black, and we're going to multiply, and then we're just going to change the opacity. And then let's group these together so they stay locked. We don't have to play around with selecting them. And then you can kind of see how that shadow effect has been applied. So depending on the amount of shadow you want, you could just increase or decrease the shadow effect. So let's just do that here for all of these, and I'm going to continue forward with all of these, and we'll be right back to start the next chapter. So I'll see you in a little bit. Great. So we're back, and you can see that I've completed the rest of the lug tread pattern. I've added the shading, shadow effect, because they are kind of tucked under and away from the perimeter of the rubber just a tad. So you get this shadow that happens on all of those lugs. And now what I want to do is work on this top section of this midsole. So another thing that you can do is you can create just change the wording of these so you can know exactly what each piece is, what each layer is, so you can reference it easier. So there, I've locked those. So now I'm going to grab this midsole piece, create a new layer, and just add that to the new layer. And I'll just rename this midsole number 2. And I can change the color to whatever color I want for the highlight of that layer. I'm going to lock the base with everything else. So let's do some texture here, and let's figure out a different way to do textures. So if you open up your textures.ai file, which is provided, you can see there's a bunch of textures for different things. So what we're going to focus on are just these basic textures. This is page 1 here. And these are really simple textures, texture fills. So I'm going to grab this one here, and I'm going to copy this and go back to my chapter 3. If you want to follow along, just open chapter 3, and we're going to paste that in here like this. So let's just put that down here. So you can see this actually has an edge with a stroke on it. That doesn't matter because this is an object in itself. What you want to see is over here, this is the in your swatch window, this is the actual swatch. And if you want to see what this swatch looks like, just drag that swatch over, and let's duplicate it and just scale this up so you can see how this swatch, what has been created for this swatch. So this is the shapes that were created. So by selecting this, and again we're going to turn down our stroke to 0.25, and let's leave this color for now. Maybe let's make it just a little bit darker. And we don't want to go too dark because we want to be able to add some shading here to give it some three-dimensionality, which we'll do in a second, but don't go too dark as if it were going to be black, because it'll just be really hard to get extra shading there. But what we'll do is we'll select this object, we'll copy and paste in front, and we want to have the fill selected. We can turn off or apply nothing to the stroke, and right here our checker white, which we name checker white, let's click on that, and notice what happened. This is actually a separate piece, but why aren't we able to see the color below? Well, that's because the white part and the gray part are actually solid colors. So if you wanted to create this where just the gray would show up, you would just make these white squares, rectangle shapes, without a fill. But another way to execute this is to go to transparency and multiply this, and that will let us reveal the base color below and apply that directly over top. So now our midsole has this color and this new texture. And what do we want to do now? So you notice this upper here, it's actually overhanging You can see on both sides here it's overhangings, which means there's going to be a little bit of a shadow that's cast underneath here. So how do we get that shadow? Let's select this shape. Let's just bring it down over here. I'm just going to fill it solid so we can see what's going on. Give it a 0 stroke. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, holding Shift and Option, I'm going to click and drag the amount of shadow I want to happen. Now notice over here in the front, what we want to do is we want to extend this line further forward so that when we cut this out, it's actually going to cut it out. And let's change this so we can see what's going on here. And if you go over here to the back, we want to do the same. We just want to extend and make sure that this is off of the main shape, which you can see that it is. Okay. So now let's grab both of these together and we will divide. Ungroup, and with V and Shift selected, I will press on that top edge and delete the rest, and here's my leading edge that I will place back here and give it a shadow color. Now the shadow might be a little bit too intense, so let's just turn that down a little bit. There we go. Now how about a highlight so we can really get some highlight there. Let's copy and paste this, and let's go to our brushes, fill with 0, and here's our white highlight brush, and because it's multiplied we're not seeing it, so let's put it back to normal and go all the way 100% opacity, and let's move this in front. And right now you're not seeing it because this layer is underneath the midsole number 1. So if you want to see what's happening, let's drag it over here into our gray area. And let's go ahead and clip out the whole top leading edge. Just delete the lower section and put that back in place here just to see what's happening. So obviously our highlight will happen in key areas, but right now it's one continuous piece, which is a little bit too long. So just change the scale. And what I want to do is let's cut this out so we get the highlights happening in certain areas. So right here, let's get one right there. Let's do another one. I'm just deleting the parts that I don't want. Alright, so right now what you can see is that we have kind of a hard highlight line, which shows that this material is cutting under. But I don't want it to be that hard, so I want it to look a little bit more smoother. So let's just reduce this transparency down. Let's see, I can group those together. And right there you can see adding a nice little effect. Now another way to create this effect, and I will just grab both of these shapes and bring that down over here. So another way to create this effect is let's just move the texture away. Let's offset. So we're going to offset, let's say negative 0.5 millimeters, and see what that looks like. We might need to do -1 millimeter. Okay, let's do that. And let's put a gradient on here. And let's add shading to both sides. And maybe we'll have a peak here. So we can move our white to kind of peak here. Let's add in another dark section down the center and white again towards the back. So you really can start to control some shading this way. And let's hit multiply. And reduce this a little bit. Okay, so now you can see there's a little bit of some depth that's happening. And let's put that back over top here and take a look at kind of what's happening here now. So we're getting a little bit more curvature happening as this curves around the front. And what I'm going to do is just going to take these points here and just pull those all the way to the edge. And this has a stroke, so let's just get rid of that stroke. And let's go to the back and let's just pull this a little bit closer to this back edge. And there we start to get a little bit a better picture of how this is being rendered. It's just looking a little bit more realistic at this point. Now, what if we want to add some highlights? Like, let's say this area is kind of a key area. We really want to highlight this area. Well, there's a couple things we can do. Let's say we want to add a little bit more of a highlight here. I'm just going to take my path and create kind of a bigger shape here. I'm just going to fill this, and again, this is on top of midsole 1, so let's just move this layer on top so we can see what's happening here. And remember this shape here that we created? Let's do another one that's customized. I'm going to have a highlight zone kind of right over here. Let's just make sure this is white, white. And I want this to kind of really gradiate out like so. Just going to move that to the back, give this a transparency of 0. And again, we're going to blend these two shapes together with our blend tool. And let's do 25 steps again. And if you want to ever change that, just double click on blend. You can go back and change it to, let's say, 40 steps. So our blend is a little bit better. And then select the two shapes and create a clipping mask, and just make sure that your highlight is behind your object shape that you want to have to pick up that highlight. Place that behind. And there you go. We've created a little bit more of a hot spot. On that leading edge. That might be a little bit too intense, so let's just drop that down a bit. And then again, since I want to reuse this gradient that I have here, I'm just going to delete that. So I do like this here, but I want this to be more kind of like in the center like this. Yes, okay. Just want this to be kind of like almost like a lens flare kind of thing that's happening. And this is really large, so let's just scale this down. And because this is so big, if you bring it down, you can get a nice little point happening. And because this point, I want the highlight to happen below, let's just drag that point a little bit higher here. That way we'll get that further forward and just knock down the transparency a bit. We can kind of get like a little bit of a highlight happening. And if your shape's too big, you can play around with the shape a bit. It's all in fine tuning. And then we can duplicate that, bring that up here and change the position. Okay. Alright, so there you go. We have the midsole, the top of our midsole cradle kind of rendered. And you have to ungroup these objects if you want to be able to affect their opacity. And you can group them back. So there you go. There's our midsole. It's picked up a little bit better. And right here where this bottom midsole is happening, we want to also add kind of like a shadow because that's rolling under. So I'm just going to take this shape here and give it a stroke like that and take off the fill. I'm going to multiply it and go down to about 74 or 75% and just start clipping this out as so. And delete the parts I don't want. And bring that back up. And then see if there's any adjusting we want to do. But notice how this looks like it's more of a rolled edge. And feel free to kind of move this around to get it the way you like. There we go. Starts to look a little bit better. More realistic. And now right in here, we want this to look like this is kind of cutting under as well. We want to add a darker, more richer value in here. So I'm going to go and select the original shape and kind of duplicate that. As so. And again, what I want to happen is right in here, I'm going to draw a line like this here and just get some shading to happen. So if you go ahead and click kind of like a curve like this with no fill, I will select both of those and divide them out. I'm going to hit D to fill with white and a black stroke, ungroup, V, and then holding shift, click what I want to keep, the rest I will delete. And over here I want to add a gradient, and what I'm going to do is remove the stroke, then add a gradient, and just get rid of those there, put white in here, and then just get this gradient, start with dark and head up to white, and really get this darker effect down here. And maybe there's going to be more dark below, so maybe over here this becomes something a little bit darker, longer dark area. Okay, and then we'll just multiply this and move this back into place. And now when you look, you start to see that this kind of looks like it's tucking under a little bit more. Okay, so that completes chapter 3, which is our midsole top cradle component. And the next chapter we're going to work on this upper. So chapter 4, open up this chapter 4 file in your folder, and this is the starting point if you want to follow along from where I am here. So we're going to work on this upper part here. And notice we already have a few pieces already clipped out, and I'm going to go ahead and just select these upper pieces right here and just make a new layer. Call it upper. And notice what just happened. Some of the laces and things like that are underneath now, but don't worry about that. We can fix that afterwards. I'm going to lock that base and start from here. So now we want to start to get this looking a little bit more realistic and applying some dimension to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mask and have some darker to lighter effect. And the way I want to do that, I'm going to select this because I've divided this out already. So I'm going to select these two pieces. I'm going to copy, paste in front, and I'm going to combine these shapes together. I'm just going to get rid of that little piece here. Going to remove that. Okay. So I have those pieces selected, and I'm just going to add a gradient, just a simple one for now, with some darker corners. And here we can just adjust the shading on this upper. And multiply this layer a little bit here. Okay. So now that we have that, I'm going to take these pieces here and move those above, and let's reduce this stroke. Let's just lighten that color up a little bit and not have any fill for now. Just we're going to apply that gradient to this outer perimeter here. And I want to offset this so that we can have a little bit of a thickness to this material, because right now it doesn't look like there's any thickness. And before I do that, I'm going to also just take the stroke off and remove the stroke. And let's just copy this over here so we can see what we're doing. So I want to apply a shadow effect in here, and just going to show you another technique. So let's do similar to what we did before. Since this material is going to be raised up, let's just move this down slightly, and let's trim this away. So let's select everything, and let's just, before we do that, let's just make sure that it's we have this correct around this back edge as well. Probably not going to see that around the back. And same for in the front, where, let me just change this so you can see it. Where this front edge here, you're not going to see this because this edge is rolling over the top of the forefoot here, so you'll see a little bit of a shadow cast here, but not over the top of that material. So if we take all these pieces, let's divide those out, and let's add a color in there. Let's ungroup these. I'm just going to go ahead and delete pieces that we don't need, and group those, and we'll put those back over here. And if you zoom in, you can make sure that you're right on. And this is going to give us some dimension to these panels, so it looks like there's some elevation to that material. And again, if we want to select the same shadow effect, let's just click there, and that'll give us the same transparency effect. And then we can group those together. And there you go. You see there's a little bit of an edge there. And what I'm going to do as well is, if I take these pieces here and I offset 0.5 millimeters, I'm going to remove that fill and apply a highlight. Let's reduce it to 0.25. Make sure it's on normal, and I'm going to cut out so that we get this leading edge here. Just go ahead and delete this part. So again, I'm just going and cutting away parts that we don't need. And this part here, probably want that to be a little bit darker. Okay, and let's offset this as well. We'll execute the same stroke. And we'll clip this out as well. Okay, so there we have our overlaid panel. It's a little bit more of a stroke to it. And you can notice here this gradient has a stroke to it. Let's turn that off, lock it, and notice this shape here also has a black outline stroke. So let's take that off. Maybe just make that 0.25. So there's a stroke, but it's small. Okay, and another thing we can do is if we offset this panel negative 0.5 millimeters, we can add another gradient in this direction to give us a little bit of shading here. And this shading has the double shade on top and bottom, so we can remove the top. There we go. Just going to customize that a bit more. Okay. And if you like the gradient that is on the underside, notice how you can kind of see there's an edge there and it's looking pretty good. Okay. Let's add our logo in. So we're still in chapter 4, but we want to add the logo into this area. So open up our logo file. And you can grab any one of these. I'm just going to grab this one here. I'm going to copy this, go back to my chapter 4 and paste that into the current layer. And what I like to do is try to keep one logo that's not gonna, just in case we screw up, you know, I have it. So let's duplicate that. And because our shoe's facing to the left, this logo is angled in the opposite direction. So there is no logo facing the alternative direction. So it's going to look a little strange, but that's fine. So alright, so here I'm going to just do like a kind of like a chrome type of logo. So let's add a gradient, fill, and let's do it like up and down. So here you don't want this to be too contrasted. You kind of want these to blend a little bit smoother. so. So again, it all comes down to how you want to create this. If you already have a preset, it's good to just use something that already exists. Makes things a lot easier. So, you know, once you set something up, it's good to just go back and maybe save that off. Alright, so here's our logo. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's ungroup this for now, and let's put our logo on a separate layer. Okay, and I'm going to knock this out of this shape here. So I'm going to copy and paste it, and I'm going to take this and we're going to divide. And I'm going to knock those out. So here I have a separate shape that I can color whatever color I like. Okay, so I can take my D shape that's been knocked out, and let's offset this 0.5 millimeters. Alright. And let's add a gradient in this direction. That looks pretty good. And let's do one separate for this one, and another one that's separate for this one here. So we have two different gradients, okay? And so this is our logo gradient, outer perimeter, and we want it to make the look like it's a little bit better of a shading. So we can copy, paste, and then add more of a simplified shadow on top, and maybe we multiply this one a little bit darker. And notice the gradient's on top, so if you lock that and then just bring this all the way to the top, that'll be good. Okay. So now if you like this, that's our logo. Now let's add some details here. So if we take our shapes here and we offset this 0.25 inside, then we can add our highlight, turn off this fill, bring this down to maybe even smaller than 0.2, maybe to 0.1, that really crisp, and then start cutting away, only catching the highlight along that top edge. And then, you know, this becomes the darker. And over here, because this is a complex curve, you just have to release the complex compound path. And then here, we'll pick up the highlight here and here. And this side here will receive the darker value, more like the shadow effect. That, and this guy here will get the shadow as well. So let's delete that and this. And select that there. And again, you know, the shadow is pretty dark, so we can always multiply that and maybe just tone it down just a tad. Okay, so now we get some dimension in this logo, so that's looking pretty good. And let's not forget about this internal guy right here. Just having some trouble selecting this individual piece. Okay, so this is our piece here, but it's actually because we offset the logo. Okay, so we have this. Now let's copy and paste this guy. And let's offset this. By 0.5. Which will give us this internal shape here. Okay. And then what we want to do with this is we want to add a stroke with our brush. And we're going to cut in 2 places, and we're going to give this a white fill. But it's multiplied, so let's put it to normal. And also let us change the stroke to 0.1 also. And let's move it into position. Excellent. And let's drop that down a little. Alright. Great, so that's looking the way I want it, which is good news. And now we can move on to creating a complex pattern shape within this upper panel here. So we're going to make some perforations, and I'll show you how to do that. Start by adding in some perf pattern into these shapes here. So let's go ahead and duplicate this piece, and using our mesh tool, let's click in the center here. Now what happens is, before we do that, let's make our object white, and let's click in the center. And with our mesh tool, whatever is dark, the darkest value will be the larger shape when we transform this, and wherever it's lighter, the shapes will become smaller. So we're going to go into Vector Raster, which is a program you can get online for about $20 or so. It's pretty cheap. We're going to create a new file, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to place that file. I'm going to click here and then just hit paste. And what that's done is it's dropped this image into this workspace. Now you can display your image or toggle that off and just display the rasters to image. There's a lot of things you can do here, so I'm just going to go quickly, and I'm going to alternate the grid. I'm going to keep it as a circle, but there's many different things you can change this to a polygon, contracting shapes, like whatever you're looking for. And let's change the spacing. That seems pretty good. And now when you want to save this, you need to save this or export this as an EPS. And let's type perfs 1 and hit save. And then what we're going to do is let us open perfs 1 into a new file. You can also place that, but I just want to do this so you can see what's going on. So there's a box, a filled box here. Let me change the color so you can see what's going on here. So you can notice that there's a a fill around here. So we can take this and just delete that fill because we just want to use the perfs. We want to use this as actual perfs. So we're going to select all these, cut, close this document, and then paste it in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer and call this perfs. I'm going to lock the other layers. Make sure everything else is locked. And on my perfs layer, I'm going to paste, and then scale this down so that it fits into my shape here. As so. Now, obviously, these are very dark black. We probably want to show this color from below. So if you use your eyedropper and select this color, get rid of the stroke. There we go. We have this fill. Now, I don't like how these perfs are going right against the edge of my logo. So I'm going to do a couple things. First, I'm going to turn my logo layer off and select this perimeter form, and I'm going to offset that by 1 millimeter. Let's see how much that offsets. That looks pretty good. So let's do that. Hit OK. And now you can see they're kind of overlapping. So that's fine. I'm just going to group all this together and combine it in my Pathfinder. And then I'm going to just select this shape here, this color fill, which is the same base fill. But notice there's a little area here in the center. So I'm going to grab this center and just delete that. Okay, now I want to have like a little bit of a recess here. So what I will do is I'm going to copy and paste. I'm just going to shift this over just a hair, and I'm going to apply a stroke. And we'll just do a 0.5 stroke, maybe 0.2, and just change the color a little bit less concentrated and rich. And just move that over. And I'm just going to cut this stroke out like that. And on this side here, this is compound path, so let's release that. And this I'm going to make white. Okay, just a quick little detail there. So now it looks like our material is kind of recessed a bit, and it's hiding the perforations, which is what I wanted to do. Now there are some that maybe, this perf, let's just get rid of this one. Let's get rid of some of these that just will look a little odd. Okay. There we go. Okay. Let's actually put that one back in. Okay. And I want to make these perfs realistic as well. So select these shapes here. Now go to your effects, and you can do a drop shadow or inner glow. You can do some different effects here. So it all depends what you're looking for. But sometimes it just depends on the effect. May not look appropriate. So on second thought, let's just select all of these and let's bring them a duplicate up here. And let's just create, we'll just shift these down a tad. And let's divide all these from each other. Now this is probably going to be a little bit too much effort here. So how else can we do this? Let's see what other effects we have here. See what that did. So it kind of gives us a little bit of an effect there. Okay, so hey, you know, if you're like that, that's good. We can create the same perfs in the front areas as well. So before we do that, let's just do one other thing. Let's get our stitching down. So this upper layer, I want a stitch row here because this is overlaid. So I'm just going to offset this -1 millimeter, and let's just fill this and move this on top. Let's put a color in here so we can see what this is. Okay, so we want to create a stitch row down here. So let's cut out the shape and delete the rest of it. Remove the fill. And let's just move this guy up just a little bit more. And let's complete that, and let's extend this as well, like that. Now this is the simple, easy way to create a stitch row. So we're going to go to our stroke and we're just going to create a dashed line. I'm going to zoom in so you can see what's going on. And I'm going to apply a rounded cap so the edges are rounded. And I'm going to change the spacing. I'm going to say, let's do this 6 point, and the gap is going to be 3 point. Let's do 4 point. Okay, and if you zoom out, you can kind of see what your spacing's like. So if that's what you like, you know, you can commit to this. It looks like it might be a little too thick, so let's tone that down. Let's maybe change the color. It's 90%. And there we go, there's your simplified stitch effect. Now if you want to do a more complicated stitch effect, let's just move that down here. Now let's say you want something that looks a little bit more realistic. Well, in your textures palette that I provided, you can go and check out some stitching right here. There's also like some zigzag stitching, things like that. So let's grab the darker based and the lighter base. Let's grab them both. So let's copy those and paste those into our file here. And let's see what we can do here. So this stitching really has like no gaps, but what's nice is if you select this, you notice that once you paste any brush, it automatically populates your brushes window here. So what's great is you can select this stitch row and then click on your white stitch. And now notice I changed the spacing. So I don't want this to be a dashed line anymore. I just want it to be a regular line because this is a brush effect. But what I do want to do is reduce the thickness of this brush so that looks a little bit better. And probably also change the transparency a bit because it does look a little on the dark side. And there you go. You see it's a little bit more realistic. Maybe we can even bring this down to 0.25. That might be too much, so let's undo that. Okay. So there you go. We have a stitch row applied. Starting to look pretty good. So now let's go and back to our upper, and let's lock this here. And let's grab these other, just locking the shapes I don't need. I'm going to start to move things onto my other layer. And those will start to appear as a raised layer. Okay. And we also want to have a stitch row along this top edge. So let's unlock everything and just offset this 0.5 millimeters. And let's do the same. Let's do the same thing here. Okay, so what I did was I just offset that shape, and I selected the eyedropper and selected eyedroppered this stitch, and it replicated that. Okay, so now my upper is looking pretty good, and I'm happy with some of these shapes. I'm just going to move these down over here so we can reuse these. I'll put a line in here for regular stitching as well. Okay, let's get rid of that. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off these shapes here. I might just put some perfs here and leave the rest alone. And we'll come back in a second. Right now I want to redo these perfs because I'm not really happy with how they turned out. So what I want to do is, let's go to our perfs layer here, and let's just redo these in a different way. So you can see there was an effect applied here, this inner glow. So again, if you want to delete this inner glow, go into your appearance window and select inner glow and just hit delete, and that'll remove, you can see how that removed that inner glow. Now what I want to do here is, in order to create a highlight and shadow effect, so it looks like this is cut out of a piece of material, just going to apply a background here so we can see what's happening. I'm going to take this and copy and paste behind. So Command C to copy, and then Command B to paste behind. And again, depending on your keyboard shortcuts or hotkeys, it may be a little bit different. But I'm going to use my arrow keys and go to the right one and down one, and change this to white. Again, notice how looks like there's like a little bit of a highlight. So let's move this a little bit closer, and then let's lock that. So Command 2 for lock. I'm going to select the original again. I'm going to do the same thing, copy and paste behind, and I'm going to go left and up and change that all the way to black, and then just reposition that as so. And then when you zoom out, you can see this looks a little bit better for a perforation that's cutting through a material. So you unlock everything. Let's delete this background, and then let's just select and group everything, and then let's move this down into position. And over here, I'm just going to take this old one and just delete it and reposition this one like this. And you can leave the previous one so you can align it if you want. Okay, and one additional thing that I want to do is let's add a mesh texture to this tongue, which is going to be the same kind of mesh that we see through our upper through these perforations. So go ahead and open your textures again, and right here under these Illustrator textures, I'm going to go ahead and select this piece. I'm going to copy this, so Command C, and go back to my chapter 5, and notice my swatches here. Once I paste this into this document, the swatch appears instantly. So let's just move this to the side. So we have our mesh, and again, let's change our stroke value to our weight to 0.25. And what I'm going to do is I want to keep this base color. I'm going to copy and paste a new shape in front. That's the same shape, and I'm going to apply this pattern. So you could do it one of two ways. Right here, make sure your fill is selected, and you can click here, or you can use the eyedropper tool, making sure your object is selected that you want to transform into this mesh, and hit that there. Now before we move on, I want to show you a couple things on what we can do with meshes. So since our mesh is currently active, I'm going to create a shape, and it's going to fill that with that mesh. Now there's certain things you can do here. So the mesh right now is on this grid where it's perpendicular in this direction. Say you want to rotate this within your shape, and let's say instead of a rectangle, you have a customized shape. Okay, so now we want to rotate this. Now if you just select your object and hit R for rotate, it's actually going to rotate your entire shape, which we don't want. What we want to do is select your image, your object, click on rotate, and you can see the rotate point happens here. If you want to change where that rotates, for this exercise you're not going to want to, it doesn't matter. But you're going to hold the little squiggly key that should be on the top left of your keyboard. If you hold that down and click somewhere outside of your object, the further out you go, the better control over the smaller movements you have. The closer you are to that rotation point, it's harder to control what angle you're going to rotate. So notice the direction. So I'm just clicking and dragging, and I can drag this, and it keeps my shape the same, but it's just changing. I'm holding down this little squiggly key. It's just changing the angle, rotating that within that shape. So it's not changing the shape angle, it's keeping it the way it is. Now, let's say you want to scale your mesh. That you think this is too big, which for this exercise, yes, it is too big. So we want to scale this down. So I'm just going to deactivate the rotation. So let's click on our object again. Now I'm going to hit S for scale. And if you hold the squiggly key, the cursive key there, and click and drag, it'll non-proportionally scale. So I can scale in this direction or with my width, but it won't be proportional. can see how it just got a little squat. If you want it to remain proportional, hold the squiggly key with the shift key. And then when you click and drag, notice my box is scaling proportionally. So it's keeping the same dimensions but just making them smaller. So I can click again to the desired size. Okay, so let's say we like this. I'm going to click out of that. Now what's nice is I can do a little shape here and have this dimension over here, and then have a second shape that has this dimension. So you can put a couple different scales if you want. If you're going to be doing different scaling of meshes or textures, you can have those all in place here. So we can get rid of this and just use this smaller guy here. So again, select your mesh. This is on top, so that's going to activate first. Click your eyedropper, since we have our scale here, and it'll apply that rotated angle plus the scale that we want. Now I want to do this to my perfs as well, so I'm going to ungroup those, and I'm going to grab the gray. You can see that right here, that we have the right one. And I'm going to copy again and paste in front, and then I'm going to use my eyedropper tool and click here. And it's going to apply that texture right inside that shape. So now you really start to see through and get some more depth in your illustration here. And if you delete this, that's okay, because we have these here and it remains in your swatches. Okay, so I'll be back. I'm going to continue adding some perforations here, and we'll be back to finish this sketch off. Okay, open up chapter 6 and let's start together at the same stage. And I've included the additional perforations through this upper material. And what you want to do now, what I'm going to do is just grab this material and let's add a texture to this material, so that it starts to differentiate from this kind of this skeletal framing piece. So I'm going to copy and paste this on top, and I'm going to group it together. And let's just change the color so we can see the different color. Really call that out. Okay. Now, going back to textures, I'm going to just grab a basic texture one more time, maybe this one here. This one looks pretty cool. So I'll copy that and pull that into my project here. And notice that it's right here. And it's similar to the pattern here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the stroke, get rid of that stroke. Now it's pretty big right now. I'm going to multiply it as well, and I'm going to scale this. Now notice all these shapes are all grouped together, and I'm going to scale this texture. So if you click S for scale and hold the squiggly with the shift again, same way we did the tongue mesh, it's going to scale all of those shapes at the same time, which is nice. So they remain grouped, they remain the same shape, but I've just scaled the texture inside there, so we can really differentiate now this framing from that piece. Okay, so let's go and check out why this front part here wasn't completed, why I left that alone. Well, the reason being is that as you go over top of the toe, some foreshortening happens, and right now these are very static and flat looking, so I want to give some realism to this toe to make it look a little bit more real, like things are wrapping over to the other side, over top of the shoe to the other side. So I'm just going to lock my upper. So I'm going to select these perforations, And what I'm going to do is go to Object, Envelope Distort, and Make with Mesh. And let's preview. So what it's doing, and before you do this, duplicate it. I already have one duplicated, but duplicate it just in case something happens. It's easier just to go back to that original data. So you can increase or decrease the amount of anchor positions that you can start to adjust and fine tune. I usually try to keep it fairly simple, because the more you have, it just starts to become very complicated in how you move things around. So keeping, maybe 2 and 2 is always an easy and good way to start that. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit closer. Now what I want to achieve here is I want to make these look like they're wrapping and getting smaller and changing their shape. So with my white selection tool here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this point, and these curves here, these anchor points, activate. So I'm just going to pull this up, and I'm going to do the same amount to the other positions, the other points. And then I'm going to, these elongated, so I'm going to select all of these center ones. I'm just going to move these up a bit. And you can see how these start to deform and bend and look like they're wrapping up. And you can do the same for the toast, because there is some wrapping that's happening in this direction as well. So we could pull these in this direction and maybe we move these in a bit. Okay. And then just reposition these. And also, what you can do here is you can scale this, which isn't a problem. And the other thing you can do is move these around and have it look like it's bending right around the shape here. So you have a lot of control over this here. Okay, notice there's a few here that are kind of like stragglers, so just pull these over here. And after you like what you have, you go and expand, and this will convert these back into vector line art. So now they become individualized shapes. And I'm just going to select some of these here that I don't want to keep, or just way too small, I'm not really going to even see them. So just delete a few of these. Okay. And go and give these the same fill color. I am going to copy and paste in front, and I'm going to select the mesh. I'm going to lock that. Then I'm going to copy, paste behind, change that to white. Then copy, paste behind, and change that to black. Okay. Great, so now we have all of our panels with some perforations. We have our tongue mesh. Let's continue and finish off our linings. change this to 0.25. I'm going to copy and paste, and I like this mesh here. I don't want to use the same tongue mesh because that's more of like a breathable material. So I'm going to select this right here, but apply that multiply effect to it. Okay. And do the same for this piece in here. I'm just going to duplicate this for a quick second. Give it no stroke. Copy, paste in front. Apply that mesh. Now this looks very flat here, so let's add a gradient. I'm going to use just the same gradient we used down here in this arch, this kind of flex zone of that midsole. We use the same gradient and just change the direction. And let's take a look how this turns out. And we'll move this on top. Okay, I'm going to offset this material 0.5 millimeters and go to my brushes, find my black, move that, remove the fill, put this on multiply, and let's cut out this piece right here. But notice this is a different layer, so okay. So create a little bit of a shadow there. So it looks like that material is kind of rolling over. Maybe we'd go to like 0.5 millimeter. Okay. And I'm just going to save this here for you so you can have that. Alright, so let's add a gradient mesh to this upper. Let's get some realism, a little bit more realism into this upper, and then we'll finish off these laces. So one thing I like to do is I'll start off with a rectangular shape, and what I like to do is this will end up being a black and white form, grayscale form, and it'll be multiplied over my upper shape here. So I'm going to go to that envelope distort and make with mesh. But before I do that, I'm going to start to play with the position of this here. Just going to add some additional points. And what I want to do is create kind of this silhouette. And really try to get as close to this shape as possible. And by doing this, I'm allowing my forms to, obviously follow these shapes as closely as possible, but when I apply this gradient mesh, it's really gonna start to look pretty realistic. Another way you could do it is, but it's not as accurate, it's selecting all these pieces, grouping them together and using that, but that doesn't always seem to work out too well. Okay, and once you have these kind of basic shapes plotted in here, and we will clip this out of a mask as well, so if your shapes and things overextend, that's not a big deal, so we will correct that. Okay, so let's go ahead and select this piece and create a envelope distort with mesh. Let's preview. Rather than doing that, let's just add let's go to this tool, our mesh tool instead. And let's add, we want to have like a collar shape here. Okay, and then maybe a shape a little lower. And before you do this, you notice it's selecting some other pieces. So let's just turn off some of these other layers that it's just going to confuse the system. Okay, so now I have some basic lines in place here. And I'm just going to move some of these around. So I want this to catch this top edge, because this material kind of has this little curvature here, kind of the way it's built. I really want to accentuate that form. And notice right here I'm going to select this point and just add a darker shape to it. And if we move this above, you can start to see what happens. We're at, you're adding like this collar kind of shape here. And if we click you can really start to see this kind of take form. Let's change these right here. Let's add this a bit darker down below. And again, as we go around the toe, let's darken all those up a little bit as well. So just keep fine-tuning. tuning everything, and you can kind of move these a little closer. Really start to make your shapes look like they're kind of contouring where that midsole is, so it looks more realistic. And also, if you feel, hey, I need, I want to have another row in here, just go down to your mesh tool again, just click on one of these cross lines first, because if you add one here, it'll add both the X and Y direction. So click on one of those and it'll add something like that. And then using your selection tool, just going to go and darken some of these as well. Maybe turn this one down a little bit. Okay. Then maybe we'll add a little bit of color, a little bit of depth right there. Okay, so if you have it the way you like, you can just go and now when we select this, our transparency activates, and we can multiply that, and you can see what's happened along that shape there. So let's lock this gradient. Notice obviously we don't want this overextending that way. So let's grab this shape and let's copy and paste it in front, and we're going to unlock that gradient mesh, and just going to move it for a second. Let's actually just move it below everything. Then I'll grab this piece and we're going to make a mask out of it. But I want this mask to be up all the way to the top. There we go. So now that mask has our gradient and it's applied all the way on top. Now our logo, this piece of our logo should be, this piece should be below, so we're going to have to move that down to our upper. And we'll move our perfs. So it gets a little tricky with your layers. You just want to make sure that these are all being executed correctly, and some of your highlights, this kind of, this effect is being applied right over top of everything. So I'm losing all my highlights and all my detail work. So if I lock that and I grab some of these shapes and just move them to the front, maybe just tone this down even further, and then I grab some of these highlights and move these up as well. Just get those all the way to the top, since those are your highlights, and you don't want to lose those. And I think what we can do is this piece right there, let's just bring that you can also see some of the laces are under, so let's move those above that gradient that we just created. I think we can move this down below. So I just move that to the back, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start moving some of these pieces behind just to see what kind of effect we can get here. And I'm just trying to find my mesh. And, you know, working with multiple layers. Let's see, that's our gradient that we have. There we go, so our mesh. So let's move this up one step at a time. There we go. We'll lock that. And we'll just darken this a little bit more. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab these perfs. I'm going to lock everything here first, and then just grab these perfs. And just move those underneath, group those together, and just get those behind. And I'm just moving step by step forward. There we go. So now, you know, it's behind this material, but it's not over top of that piece right there. So okay, we can move on and finish off some of these laces. And again, these laces are a little emphasized here with the edge. So I'm just going to remove that edge, and again, you can apply a stroke of like 0.25 just so there's something there. And to get these to look realistic, you can go and add your mesh tool. Now, depending on what color you want these to be, so for this I'm just going to leave them white, but if you want to add like a highlight or shadow, again, it all depends on where this starts to create these shapes, but you can go in and kind of select and add in some shading, some customized gradient shades like this. Really accentuate your laces, and do that for, you know, for everyone here. And again, before you do that, because it does convert your shape, And even though you try to get out of that, flattening transparent, it's really hard to go back. So I recommend just making a duplicate of all your laces before you go and do any of that. Let's just change these to red so we can see those in there. I'm just going to simplify these real quick before I go and finish off all those laces. And over here I'm going to copy and paste. I'm going to add this gradient effect. Oops. Something like that, and then if you copy and paste and add the gradient. Now if you want to have something look like it's curving, what you can do is, using your knife tool, go ahead and slice this piece up a little bit. And what it's doing is you're just taking your shape and you're cutting it a few times. You can start to control the gradient a little bit better. You just want to make sure that your gradient doesn't extend up over that cut, because you will notice a seam. So just keep that a little bit behind where you made the cut. That'll help a lot. Okay, and then what I want to do is I want to create like a little bit of a shadow here. So let's duplicate this, apply that stroke. Let's do 0.25, and we'll just cut this out, and I'm just going to put a highlight on the other side. Let's do this white. And this black, I'm going to apply my multiply, just tone that down a little bit. I'll grab both of those and reposition. Zoom in a little bit. And just kind of reposition some of these. Some of those lines. Okay. And I'll do the same here, since I do want to have more of like a thickness on that back side as well. Just going to go ahead and apply the same multiplied effect. Yeah, so now I'm just going to fix up the artwork here a little bit. Some funky stuff happened. Okay. Alright, I'm just going to tone that down. It looks a little too dark up there. Again, don't, sometimes if it's not the way you like, you just have to keep playing around, changing some of the values, and you probably want to have like a little bit of a darker patch here as well. So let's take that gradient, let's cut that out too with the knife. Just change the direction of this gradient. Okay, let's get a little bit darker here. Okay. So there we go. We have a little bit more of a realistic piece here, and you can add some more brushes and highlights. So what I'm going to do here is just fill the stroke with my white brush, and let's bring it down here so we can see what's happening. And I'm just going to cut that out. And delete the part I don't want. Just kind of reposition a little bit. So you just have to keep doing that to a bunch of little places and really make this thing punch off the page that much more. I'm going to add a gradient also to the tongue because this kind of looks a little flat. So I'm going to copy paste, and I'm just going to select this gradient here and apply this gradient kind of like this. So it starts to give me a little bit more of a curved kind of feel, kind of where there's like a pick up a highlight on this side and it rolls over. And another thing you can do is, if you want to just offset this material, let's change the color so you can see, and remove that fill. We'll apply a white brush, and maybe you make this 3 points, so really thickening that, maybe 2, and then cut out here and here. I'm going to select the piece that's left over, delete it, and you can start to get a little bit more dimension. So it looks like, you know, your tongue is kind of wrapping over to the other side. So all these little details help give it some dimension. And again, over here, if you want to have a little bit more curvature, kind of like a collar shape, because this does kind of roll a bit, let's just take that piece that we already had and let's increase the stroke to, let's say 4 points, and let's just cut it. And what I'm doing is I'm cutting off parts that I don't want, and then I'm going to just follow this up and finish it off the way I like. Maybe this gets 6 points. And then we just change the transparency down a little. There we go. So you really start to pick up this collar. This kind of collared shape here. Starting out now with chapter 7, we're going to finish this off and add a background with reflection. So let's first off, the easy part, let's add a background. And we're just going to make a black background. And obviously we want to apply this to the lowest level of your layers so that it falls all the way behind everything. Now notice I didn't cut these shapes out of my midsole, so what I'm going to do is just go back in, and let me change the background color from being pure black to something a little bit lighter. Okay, something like that. Alright, so 90%. I'm going to go to my tooling and grab these shapes, and just for this exercise here I'm just going to fill it with the same color as the background, because I'm not going to have any gradients or anything happening in the background for now. And those nicely blend in with our background. So here we have a background, and we want to apply a shadow reflection. So let's put a shadow in here. Now the way I'll do my shadows is the same way I did my brushes. I'm going to fill this with black. I'm going to copy and paste and just scale this up like that. I'm going to reduce this transparency down to 0%, the opacity, and we'll blend. We will blend this shape to this shape, and let's do it, say, when I have a nice shadow, let's say 35 steps. Let's see what that looks like. That looks pretty good. And we can multiply this as well. And if you think the center part's a little too harsh, we can always just get that a little smaller. Okay, so now we can, depending on if you want this object to look like it's floating, you can leave this kind of hovering. You can put it here, and again, let's move this down to kind of like down to one of the lower layers, so that our outsole is actually on top of it. Okay, so there we have our shadow. Now here comes the fun part. Let's take our upper, and we want to take this and reflect that down into this ground. So how are we going to do that in Illustrator? Okay, so before I do that, let me just put my shadow on a separate layer, because I don't want to copy that over and reflect that. Just need that one time. And I locked my background layer. Okay, now let's unlock all the other layers, and let's select our upper. So notice you can see all the different layers that are here. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to make a new layer. Let's call it reflection, and let's paste that into this layer. It's going to take a second because there's a lot of data there. It's duplicating all your information. Okay, let's group this together, and let us transform and reflect this to your horizontal axis, and then let's move it down here. And you just want to make sure that you're below okay. Now I'm just going to grab this stuff that's down here. Let's just move that up here for now, so we keep it in our file. And let's move our reflection all the way down to underneath the shadow. Okay, now what I do here is create a rectangle, and we'll do this. Let's lock every other layer. And we're on a reflection layer, okay? So what I'll do is I will create a rectangle like this, and I'm going to apply a gradient using this background color. So I'm going to select this, fill it as a solid, and then under gradient I'm going to go and apply this gradient right here. Just make sure my gradient's going in the right direction. So I want the dark area to be the darkest at the base, and up here the white is going to show through. Because we're going to take this white and actually an easier way to do it is let's just fade to black here with the transparent already set up, and this black here will convert that to this gray color, which is our background. So if you select that, this will activate, and then it keeps it right here, the previous selection. So I'm just going to drag that color, apply it right here, and notice I'm still seeing some of my upper here. So we're going to move this over. So notice how it starts to solidify there, and then we'll do something like this. Going to move that over. This gets a little finicky, but can do something like that. And now you've applied, and if you want to hide this for just for time being, you can just create a white box down here and just that'll just fill over top here, so we don't have to see that. So there you go, there's our reflection of our upper. And if you want to change, the reflection, the amount that's reflected, you can kind of start to move this around so it's not too overpowering, as so. And there's our design finalized. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and hope you use these techniques in all of your future design work, and really punch your renderings and take it to the next level, and wish you all the best. See you again soon.